"Sir, I need you to put that weapon down right now." The young Delta Force guard's voice echoed through the dim armory, but the old man didn't move. He just kept polishing the rifle, slow, steady, calm, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The room was silent, except for the soft scrape of cloth against steel. Each motion carried precision, respect, and something else. Something the young soldier couldn't explain. "Sir, this is a restricted area," the guard said again, firmer this time. Still no response. The old man's eyes were fixed on the rifle in his hands, a weapon older than most men on base. The recruit's finger tightened slightly near his holster. He was trained for confrontation, but this didn't feel like one. It felt like walking into someone's memory. The veteran finally spoke, his voice quiet, deep and steady. "Young man," he said, "this rifle's seen more than you can imagine. I'm just giving it a proper goodbye." The guard hesitated.
"Goodbye?"
The old man nodded, still wiping the barrel. "It's time. 40 years is a long time to hold on." There was something in his tone, not defiance, not arrogance, just deep, quiet pain, the kind that only soldiers carried. The guard took a step closer. "That's not standard issue. What's your clearance level, sir?" The old man looked up at him for the first time. His eyes were pale gray, calm but sharp, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and said too little. "You tell me," he replied softly, turning the rifle so the metal caught the light. The young guard leaned closer to inspect it, and that's when he saw it. Carved into the receiver, beneath years of polish and wear, were 7 words burned deep into the steel: "For those who never came home, silent dagger." The guard froze. Every part of his training screamed at him to stay professional, but those words, they hit something deeper. Because silent dagger wasn't a term he was supposed to recognize, and yet he did, barely, whispers from old instructors. A mission that supposedly never existed. A black operation buried in classified archives. "Where did you get this?" the guard asked, his voice suddenly smaller. The old man gave a faint, almost tired smile. "Didn't get it, son," he said. "Earned it." The silence that followed was heavy. The hum of the fluorescent light above flickered once, as if the air itself understood the weight of the moment. Then the veteran laid the rifle down gently, like laying an old friend to rest. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Do what you're trained to do. Just remember, not every story makes it into the books." Outside, footsteps echoed, the sound of more soldiers approaching. The young guard glanced toward the door, then back at the old man. He didn't know why, but something told him. This wasn't just a trespasser. This was history sitting right in front of him. The footsteps grew louder. 2 more soldiers entered the armory, boots striking concrete, rifles slung tight. Their faces shifted from alertness to confusion as they saw the old man standing calmly by the bench. "Who authorized this visitor?" one asked. The young guard swallowed hard. "No one, sir." "He just appeared. Said his name was Harold Mason." The older soldier frowned. "Harold Mason?" He looked at the veteran again, studying the patches on his faded jacket, threadbare but unmistakable. Delta Force, old insignia, the kind no one had worn in decades. The veteran met their eyes without fear. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I'll leave once I finish. This rifle's going home today." "Home," the sergeant repeated. "You're standing in a restricted facility, handling an unregistered firearm. You can't just walk in here." "I know," Mason replied. "And I won't be long." His voice was calm. Too calm. It wasn't arrogance, it was familiarity. Like a man who had walked through danger so many times that rules no longer frightened him. The sergeant stepped closer. Identification. Mason reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table, a weathered leather wallet, cracked from age. Inside was a faded military ID card, the photograph barely visible. But the seal, the Delta emblem, was real. And below it, engraved name and rank, Master Sergeant Harold Mason. The younger guard blinked. He'd heard that name before. In training, whispered during late-night briefings about missions no one was allowed to discuss. Silent Dagger, a mission said to have been erased after everyone on it was declared missing in action. The sergeant looked at the ID, then at Mason. This can't be real. They listed that entire unit as KIA in 1987. Mason didn't argue. He simply nodded. That's what they decided to write. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Even the hum of the light seemed to fade. The young guard felt something stir, confusion, respect, disbelief. Finally, the sergeant exhaled. All right, sir. You'll have to come with us. Command will need to verify all this. Mason didn't resist. He carefully laid the rifle back into its case, wiping the last trace of oil from the metal. As he closed the lid, he whispered something under his breath, a single name. The guard caught it. A man's name followed by another, and another. It took a moment to realize what he was hearing. He was reciting the names of his team, every soldier lost during Operation Silent Dagger. When he finished, Mason looked up. Do what you must, he said softly. But handle that rifle with care. It carries more than metal. The soldiers exchanged a glance, unsure whether they were dealing with a trespasser, a madman or a legend. As they escorted him toward the hallway, one of them whispered, "If that's really him, then we just brought back a ghost." And in the quiet armory behind them, the rifle rested alone under the flickering light, its engraving catching the glow like a whisper from the past for those who never came home. By the next morning, the story had spread quietly across the base. An unidentified veteran, a weapon no one could trace, an engraving tied to a mission that wasn't supposed to exist. Rumors moved faster than orders. By sunrise, even the commander had heard them. Colonel Daniels was not a man who entertained legends. He was precise, disciplined, and trusted only what could be verified on paper. So when the report reached his desk, retired Delta Master Sergeant Harold Mason, unauthorized presence in Armory 3, he decided to see for himself. The old man was waiting in the debriefing room, sitting perfectly still. No cuffs, no resistance, just a quiet patience, like he'd been through this kind of waiting before. When the colonel entered, Mason stood and saluted. It was a perfect salute, sharp, respectful, from a soldier who had never forgotten what honor meant. "Master Sergeant Mason," Daniels began, scanning the file in his hand. "According to every record we have, you died 38 years ago." Mason gave a small nod. "That's what I was told too, sir." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me the entire record of Operation Silent Dagger, an OP so classified even the Pentagon denies it happened, was wrong?" "I'm not telling you anything, sir," Mason said quietly. "You asked for truth. I can only offer memory." Daniels sat down across from him. "Then start there. What was Silent Dagger?" Mason didn't answer immediately. He looked past the colonel to the window, where the morning light cut through the blinds in sharp, pale lines. When he finally spoke, his tone carried the weight of graves. "It was supposed to be a rescue mission," he said. 5 men, deep insertion. No backup, no recognition. We were told we'd bring back what others couldn't." His voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from remembering. "Things went wrong from the start. Faulty intel, radio silence. 2 men taken, 1 wounded. We made it out with nothing but loss." Daniels listened, his expression unreadable. "And the report?" "Erased," Mason replied. "They said we were never there. Easier that way. Cleaner, the world moves on." The colonel's grip tightened on the file. "And that rifle?" Mason's eyes softened. "It belonged to Lieutenant Harris, the youngest of us. He didn't make it home. After the mission, I carved the names of every man we lost into that weapon. Every line of it meant something. I kept it because no one else remembered them." The room went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate between ticks. Finally, the colonel leaned back, his tone lower now, not as a superior officer, but as another soldier. "You came here to return it?" "Yes, sir," Mason said. "The armory used to be ours. I figured it was time the rifle stayed where it belonged." Daniel studied him for a long moment. In the veteran's tired eyes, he saw no deceit, no madness, only truth worn thin by years of silence. "Wait here," the colonel said, standing. "I'm making a call." As the door closed behind him, Mason exhaled quietly. Outside the small window, sunlight touched the parade field, bright and warm. as if unaware that one of its forgotten soldiers had just resurfaced from the shadows of history. Colonel Daniels walked down the narrow corridor, the veteran's words echoing in his mind. Every instinct told him this couldn't be real, and yet something about Mason's composure felt impossible to fake. He called in the armory technician. "Get that rifle to the weapons historian," Daniels ordered. "I want every detail checked. Serial number, issue year, engraving depth, alloy, everything." Within the hour, the rifle was laid under bright white light. Technicians circled it carefully, cameras flashing, gloves brushing along the faded surface. The metal was aged but perfectly maintained, cleaned so often it gleamed like a relic of devotion. Then the call came. The historian's voice was low, tense, uncertain. "Sir, we just cross-referenced the weapon's serial. It shouldn't exist." "But it does," Daniels frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning it was registered to a classified Delta unit, designation SD-47. He paused. "That matches Mason's story." "Silent Dagger. The file is locked under Cold War blackout level." The colonel's pulse quickened. "So it's real." "Yes, sir. And one more thing, the engraving on the receiver. That was done in field. Laser depth matches field carving methods from that era. Whoever wrote it wasn't just commemorating names. It was meant to preserve them." Daniels turned slowly toward the observation window, where Mason sat quietly on the other side, his hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. All this time, people had thought he was a trespasser, when in truth he'd been guarding the last proof of a mission that had vanished from history. He went back into the room. Mason looked up, calm as ever. "Sir." Daniels set the file down. "They confirmed it. The weapon, the engraving, the unit. It all checks out." The old soldier gave a faint nod, almost as if he already knew. "I figured they'd find the truth when it was time." The colonel leaned forward. "You were the only survivor, weren't you?" Mason's jaw tightened. He hesitated before answering. "Survivor isn't the right word, sir. I stayed behind to give them a chance. I wasn't supposed to come back, and yet you did." Mason looked down at his hands. "Sometimes that's the hardest part." For a moment the colonel said nothing. There were no words fit for what he was hearing, just the heavy realization that this man had carried the ghosts of 5 brothers for almost 4 decades. Daniels stood and reached for the intercom. "Get me command," he said quietly. "Tell them we've got something they'll want to see." Through the glass, the rifle still glowed beneath the lab lights, the engraving shining like a scar that refused to fade. "For those who never came home. Silent Dagger." In that moment, even the younger technicians understood. This wasn't about a weapon anymore. It was about remembrance, about a man who refused to let history erase the price of silence. And somewhere deep inside the base, a classified alert pinged across secure lines, the kind of message that made even senior officers sit up straight. The phone on Colonel Daniels's desk rang only once before he picked it up. He already knew who it would be. A voice came through, steady, commanding, and edged with curiosity. "Colonel, we just received your report. You're saying a Delta operator presumed KIA since 1987 walked into your armory?" "Yes, sir," Daniels replied. "Name Harold Mason. Identity confirmed. Weapon verified through deep archive records." Silence on the other end. Not disbelief, something heavier. A memory. Finally the voice spoke again. "I knew that name. Mason was under Colonel Grant's command during Operation Silent Dagger. He wasn't just any soldier. He was their point man." Daniels leaned back slowly, letting that sink in. "Sir, permission to debrief him directly?" "Negative," the voice replied. "We're sending someone down. You'll understand when you see who." The line went dead. Minutes turned into hours. Base personnel whispered as unmarked vehicles rolled through the gates, black SUVs gliding like shadows under the floodlights. When the doors opened, 2 men stepped out, both wearing dress uniforms so pristine they looked carved from steel. The elder of the two, silver hair, still sharp in the eyes, walked straight past security and into the interrogation room. No introductions. He stopped in front of Harold Mason, studying him as if looking through the years. "Mason," he said finally. The veteran stood slowly. Colonel Grant. For a long moment neither man moved. They had both been ghosts in the same forgotten story, one buried in paperwork, the other buried in silence. Grant exhaled, his voice rough. "We thought you were gone, son." "Almost was, sir," Mason replied softly. "But I had a promise to keep." Grant nodded, glancing toward the rifle case on the table. "You kept it, didn't you?" "Their names?" "Yes, sir. Every one of them. I wasn't going to let the world forget who they were." For the first time in years, Colonel Grant's expression cracked, the stoicism breaking into something raw. He reached out, touching the rifle like it was a sacred relic. "I read your report back then," he whispered. "They said there were no survivors. But I knew better. I could feel it." Mason didn't respond. His silence said everything. Grant turned to Daniels. "You'll prepare a transport. This man isn't a trespasser. He's a soldier returning from a war that never ended." "Yes." "Sir," Daniels said quietly. As the colonel and veteran walked out together, soldiers along the corridor stood instinctively at attention. None of them had ever met Harold Mason before, but in that moment, they all understood who he was. And when he passed the young guard who had first pointed his rifle at him, Mason stopped for just a second. "Don't feel bad, son," he said gently. "You did what you were trained to do. We all did." Once the young man swallowed, nodded, and saluted, Mason returned it, crisp, perfect, and full of a lifetime of weight. Outside, as the convoy doors shut and the engine started, the last thing the soldiers saw through the tinted glass was Mason resting one hand on the rifle case beside him. For the first time in decades, the ghosts of Silent Dagger were no longer forgotten. They were finally going home. 3 weeks later, the base stood still. Every flag was lowered halfway. Every man in uniform knew something rare was happening, something that didn't exist in their manuals or history books. In the center courtyard, beneath the open sky, a platform had been set. Rows of Delta Force operators lined the edges, men who'd faced death, now standing silent for one who had lived through it alone. At precisely 0900 hours, 2 black vehicles rolled to a halt. From the first, Colonel Grant stepped out. From the second, Harold Mason. He was no longer the tired old man who had walked into the armory that night. His posture was straight, his steps firm, his eyes carrying the calm weight of remembrance. In his hands, the same rifle, polished, oiled, resting in a glass case. The engraving gleamed beneath the morning sun. Project Iron Faith. Those who never returned. The crowd didn't move, didn't whisper. Even the air seemed to wait. Colonel Grant took the podium, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. 38 years ago, a mission went dark. Officially, there were no survivors. But today, one man stands before us to remind this nation that sacrifice does not vanish with silence. He turned toward Mason. This man carried the names of his brothers through every year he lived, and he carried their story when the rest of us forgot. Mason stepped forward. He looked at the sea of uniforms, young men, strong, alive, and for a moment the ghosts seemed to stand among them. He set the rifle case upon the podium, his hands trembling slightly. "They were more than soldiers," he said quietly. "They were sons, husbands, fathers. And when the world moved on, I couldn't, because promises don't end with a mission." A hush spread over the courtyard. Even the generals stood with their heads bowed. Then Colonel Grant reached into a small black box and lifted a medal, one few had ever seen. "By order of the United States Special Operations Command," he said solemnly, "Sergeant Harold Mason is hereby recognized for valor beyond duty, for keeping faith with those who could no longer speak for themselves." Mason's hands shook as the medal was pinned to his chest. Not from pride, from relief. For the first time in decades, he could finally let go. The bugler raised his horn. The notes of taps drifted across the air, soft, haunting, eternal. Each sound carried the names engraved on that rifle, one by one, into the wind. When the last note faded, Mason lifted his head toward the sky. The sunlight caught his tears, turning them to gold. He whispered a single line under his breath, one only the wind heard. "For all of you, I made it home. The ceremony ended quietly as it should. No reporters, no speeches, just silence and respect. The rifle was placed inside the Delta Force Hall of Honor, sealed behind glass, beneath a small plaque that read, "Project Iron Faith, those who never returned." Their promise kept by one who did, and every new recruit who passed through that hall would pause before it, wondering who Harold Mason was, and why an old rifle could make even the toughest soldiers stand a little straighter. If you were moved by this story, take a moment to remember those who kept their faith, even when the world forgot.